Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 23rd episode of Tech Life Skills with Tanmay. My name is Tanmay Bakshi. Thank you for joining in today. And before we even get started, I want to start off by telling you something, and that is that I can tell personally that today's episode is going to be really fun. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I know today's episode is going to be really fun because this is the first episode in the entire series, or, well, we also have to mute. There we. Let's see where that audio is coming from. That's one moment. All right, now we should be good to go. Finally, you guys can probably hear me, and there should be no more echo. But now that we're back, as I was mentioning, this is actually the first episode in the Tech Life Skills series where the special guests are younger than me. So I can already tell this is going to be a really fun episode, and hopefully we have no more little technical glitches. But of course, I'm really excited for today. We're being joined by two very talented high school students. These two high school students are Gianluca Astorino. He's a grade 12 student from Toronto, and we're also being joined by Anoushka Rishi, a grade 10 student from New York State. And so now, without any further ado, I'd like to invite our two special guests to the show. Welcome, Anoushka and Gianluca.
Hey Tammy, thanks for having us.
Of course, it's great to have you great to have you both on the show. It's I'm sure today's going to be a really fun discussion. Great to sort of hear your thoughts around education and technology and where they intersect, those sorts of things. Before we begin, though, I would love to have everyone know a little bit more about the work that the two of you do. So, Anoushka, would you like to sort of start off by sort of introducing yourself, and then we'll sort of start discussing about the world of education and technology.
Yeah, definitely. So, hi, my name is Anoushka Rishi. I am in 10th grade and at Syosset High School, and I'm more of an all-rounder. I don't just focus on tech, but in tech, I'm part of a robotics club that has been doing a bunch of projects over the summer to help in COVID-19, delivering PPE and whatsoever. I'm associated with a lot of art, singing, playing music. And I also did an internship over the summer for Girls Who Code. So I'm very immersed in coding through that.
Very nice. Thank you very much for sharing. And I personally, I feel like there's so much that we can do at that sort of intersection of like creativity and technology. So I'm really interested, and I'll ask you a lot about that in just a moment. But Gianluca, I'd also love to hear a little bit about the work that you do.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Gianluca Astorino. I'm currently intern at IBM where I work on kind of developing software, both front and back end for mainly web applications, test web applications as well. So I'm very interested in coding and taking it to the next level really.
Wonderful. All right. So actually, you know what? Now that you mentioned Anushka, there was something that I wanted to ask you, a question that I had that I was sort of genuinely curious about personally. And but before we get to that, now that you mentioned the world of art and things that we traditionally sort of talk about as creative, um, I sort of wanted to ask you a question around that because you see, a little while ago, I had a talk actually at the Creative Foundation in Winnipeg, and at that talk, one of the key points that I was sort of making was that we traditionally think when we say the word creativity, we traditionally think of things like like as you mentioned, like art and music and these sorts of things. But I feel like creativity is even just more generally us as humans being able to come up with novel ideas or ways of doing things or putting together different even technical systems in ways that are new, imaginative, right? So technology in a way can be, I believe, just as creative, not necessarily analytical and mathematical as a lot of people think it is, as something like art. Would you agree with that? Do you think like when you're working with technology you have to put a similar sort of creativity into it as you would with your regular art?
Yeah, definitely. So technology can be seen as like a bunch of things. So a long, long time ago, like the table was considered to be technology. A chair was considered to be technology, and we see architecture as a type of art form. But really, everything is technology. Anything new is considered technology.
Yeah, exactly. And something that we like invent to augment our capabilities, right? Something to so that we can do more without having to put in necessarily as much effort, still get a lot more done, right? That's what technology is all about. And I feel like technology has really been helping out in COVID as well, right? So, for example, throughout this whole pandemic, technology has really been enabling us to do a lot of the things that we used to do, but now more efficiently and hopefully, in a safer way during the pandemic. And I feel like one of the fields that's really, really changed, something that I've taken a look at the change sort of happening in front of me is the field of education, right? Things have the whole field sort of been turned around on its head, and I'm homeschooled, and so of course I feel like in a way everyone's been forced to homeschool, for the past couple of weeks, and sort of do things virtually and do things through Zoom or other video conferencing. So can you tell me a little bit more? I actually want to hear from both of you. What has the experience been like? Changing in the sort of how has education changed for you due to COVID, and what kind of role has technology played also in making that transition smoother for you? Maybe we can start with you, Gianluca.
Yeah, sure. So for me specifically, back in March, we started right away with Zoom calls and or like Google Meet and stuff like that, and it was kind of what's the word? It wasn't very comfortable for everyone at first. Everyone was, having a hard time coping with it, and we weren't really learning the same way as we would in school. But then as it progressed, teachers started to get more comfortable, students started to get more comfortable. We all kind of got familiar with the technology we were using, and it became an overall good experience in my opinion. So like for me, continuing in September, I start school tomorrow, and I'm still taking the route to stay online.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm getting back into, getting on a Zoom call every morning at 8 a.m. and starting school. But, some people don't prefer that. I prefer that just because I guess I'm more comfortable with the technology. But I feel like once everyone starts to get more comfortable with it, then we all, uh, it just works out better for everyone in the end. We realize that it's okay to do it from home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially with the technology sort of aiding that transition, right? Like as you mentioned, it's always possible that we start off, not really being comfortable with that technology, taking a little bit to adapt. I mean, if you told someone before the pandemic that in like a couple of weeks we're going to transition to having completely virtual school and everything, they would have thought that you're crazy, or they wouldn't have
I
believed
know.
you. but but now we've sort of transitioned the whole field of education, and it was that quick. Because it sort of had to be. It sort of forced us to innovate that way, something that we didn't necessarily have the incentive to do before. Anushka, I'd also like to hear from you. What have your experiences been like?
Yeah, so my school also like really quickly transitioned straight to Google Meets once the pandemic got very, very huge and well known. We were all on Google Meets. No one was really comfortable with it. We all kept our cameras off, our mics off. Sometimes people would like not even be in the class. They would be off doing something else.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of finessed our way through the last quarter of school by not really learning. No one was really learning the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And now my school started earlier this month, and now it's a mandate that we have to have our cameras on and we have to be engaged in discussion. So I think that people are starting to get much more comfortable with it. Teachers are a lot more happier now that the camera's on because before they were speaking just to blank icons.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
and we may be like uncomfortable with it right now still, But I just want to think about like in the winter months, like it'll be nice to just stay at home and I don't know, like have a cup of hot chocolate or something next to you while you're learning. So it's definitely going to get better, I hope.
Yeah, and that's a really nice point that you mentioned. I mean, you being in Toronto, well, all of us are in places where it gets cold in the winter, the three of us. So it does make sense that we would want to stay home throughout the winter instead of having to go to school. Yeah, I can imagine that would be a lot more convenient. Um, I feel like one thing that I've noticed also is that this transitions, at least what I've seen personally, is it's sort of forcing people to become more technically proficient, right? Being able to use technology better and learn how to like interact with tech. I feel like a good example is that when you start working with technology more and more, you slowly gain an intuition for just how things work, right? With tech. And this is an example that I actually personally found was pretty interesting. And I was on a call with a friend of mine a little while ago, and I was sharing my screen through Zoom. And there's when you share your screen, you can choose a little option to let you actually share your computer audio. So if you like play a video on YouTube or whatever, it'll share your audio with the person with the people on the call that are viewing your screen. And so I had turned that on and I was showing that guy a video. And one thing that I noticed was that he told me the video was too loud for him. And traditionally you would try turning down the volume of the video, and this doesn't seem like much, and it really isn't. But I've noticed that when you sort of work with technology enough, you get an intuition for how things work. So, for example, what I decided to do when he told me it was too loud is just sort of instinctively, instead of changing my computer output volume, I went to the YouTube video and the little volume button near the YouTube video turned that down because I sort of just had the sense in my mind that, of course, the YouTube video is controlling its own output volume to the system. The system's then redirecting to my headphones or whatever, and Zoom's picking it up from there, not from what my speakers are outputting, right? Of course. And that's something that seems obvious when I sort of point it out like this, but being able to have just like this intuition for how things work, I think is really important. And building technology, I think, gives you a little bit of that intuition, gives you a little bit of that experience that helps you sort of just interact with tech in your day-to-day life even, right? A good example that I gave a few episodes ago as well was like, I mean, if you're going on vacation to like France or something, right? You're gonna want to learn a little bit of French so that you can interact with the locals and talk a little bit and sort of make your way around. So I mean, if we're using technology every single day for everything that we do, now it's even education that's powered by technology. It kind of makes sense that we want to speak the computer's language, and it kind of makes sense that we want to know how to interact with it so we can get our work done more efficiently. And of course that language is code. And so I know the two of you, work quite a bit with technology, and of course lots of other things. And I sort of wanted to know what your experiences have been like working with technology. I mean, I've been working with tech for many years now, and it's something that I'm like really passionate about. It's something that is really just like a sort of hobby for me, something that I love working with. And I want to sort of hear from you. How did you get interested in the world of technology? What was that thing that sort of sparked that interest in technology for you? Anoushka, let's hear from you first.
So in my earlier years, like in elementary school or whatsoever, I wasn't really too fond of technology. I was more into the artistic side. But once I got into high school and I joined my robotics team, that really like kickstarted something like I want to code, I want to do this. And yeah, so after joining a club that's based around tech, I really got into it, really got immersed into it, wanted to learn more, and I just want to see how far I could go.
I I can really understand what you're saying. I feel like it I feel like getting passionate about something is half the work is discovering what it is that you're passionate about, and until you're exposed to a couple of different things, it's really hard to discover what that is. I sort of discovered I was passionate about the world of technology when I saw my dad programming, for example, right back when I was like 5, and I was like, oh, that looks interesting. And so I sort of, he introduced me to the world of programming, and I sort of took it from there with different books and the internet and these sorts of things. But yeah, once you discover what it is you're passionate about, it's something that you can really work towards. Gianluca, what about you? How did you get interested in the world of tech?
Yeah, so from a young age, my father was always coding or working with other people who were coding, and it kind of just he wanted to teach me about it, and I at first I wasn't so interested. So we took some, online courses, and I was getting really frustrated with it. Like I couldn't even sit down for half an hour and just work with it. And then I started getting into high school. I worked with computers a little more. I took a coding class in grade 10, I think it was. That was my first one. And we used Turing. And it was like the most basic thing ever. It was pretty funny, but it was good because it gave me the basic that I needed to move forward, right?
Hmm.
And then as I started more, I started developing these applications for simple robots like Now and Pepper that I did at IBM actually. And then from there, I started working on web applications and I with Node.js, like HTML, front end, back end. And I kind of just got more interested as I went forward. But from a young age, I was never truly that interested in it until I started working with it more. And I think that's important. Once we start working with technology more, people start to find that they like it, they enjoy it, and maybe want to move forward into that field, right?
Yeah, I feel like maybe something else that and tell me if this actually affected you. I feel like when you're young, this doesn't really affect you as much. Like when I was 5, right? I was just watching my dad program. I had no clue that people were paid to program. I didn't know what the concept of a job really was, right? I didn't really understand
Yeah.
these social constructs. So I didn't really have that stigma that, oh, coding is for geniuses or it's for people that are really good at math or these things that people think. Did either of you have that sort of like sort of mental baggage associated with the world of technology when you were getting into it?
For me, it was kind of like I didn't know that it was like you said, like everyone could get into it or someone, I didn't. The way I thought about it was you had to be this high level person, high level technology. You had to be so, indulged in math all the time and
Yeah.
these things, and you should have learned it from a young age, and you can't learn it afterwards. And that's the way I thought when I was younger until I
Hmm.
started getting into it, and now, it's getting easier as you go, but you have to start from somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So.
And Anushka, same thing with you. Like, what was that initial picture of technology that you had when you started?
Yeah, so whenever I pictured a programmer or someone like immersed in tech, I would see like a person sitting in a dark room behind a bunch of screens and they were just like clicking away and doing like super cool things. And I thought like, oh my God, I could never do that. But after like learning like the basics and everything, I'm like, I can work my way up there. It just takes time.
Yeah, you're right. And I feel like again because the two of you were so young. I mean, we're all still young, but when because you were even younger when you actually started programming, you didn't have as much of that sort of connotation of being a genius or being great at math along with programming. It was something that you were still a little bit flexible to, right? Open to sort of changing. I've noticed that as people sort of get older, it's more difficult to be able to convince them that no, you don't actually need to be a genius to do any of this, right? You can just learn the basic constructs and it gets easier as you go, as you mentioned, Gianluca. Something actually that I wanted to ask you about that. Personally, I've always thought that when you learn how to program, you're not really learning an individual programming language, right? So, like with a human language, you're learning an individual language. Like if I were to, let's just say I've been speaking English since I was born, right? I understand English inside and out. I know the vocabulary, I know the syntactical structure, I know what sort of works, different phrases, idioms, these sorts of things. But then it's really hard for me to transfer that English knowledge over to another language unless it's really closely related, like Frisian or something. Um, so in computers, I think we actually have the opposite, right? It's each language is actually more similar to each other than dissimilar, right? Like if you were to look at even, let's just say two completely different worlds, Python and Swift. One is interpreted and encourages duck typing. One is compiled and is very strict. Um, Even they have the same basic set of constructs. There's loops, there's conditions, there's functions, there's classes, there's structures, and a couple of other things. They differ in some ways, right? Like Swift has value semantics and things like this. But at the end of the day, it's still the same fundamental set of constructs that you're using to program a computer. So, my question for both of you, first of all, actually, before I ask you about that, what languages have the two of you programmed in so far? Gianluca, what programming languages have you used so far?
Java and JavaScript, specifically Node.js for the back end of the web applications. I focus mainly on that. Yeah.
Very interesting. And Anushka?
I know Python. And over the summer I learned a little bit of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, like basic website coding.
Very nice. And have you noticed, or have you sort of felt, that when you learn one language, transferring knowledge or learning another language becomes easier, or does it kind of become harder? Like, what was your experience like? Either Gianluca, maybe we can go with you first.
Yeah, sure. So, I noticed that they're pretty similar. I think actually last summer you and I and another one of our friends were sitting in a conference room, and I was asking you for some help with some Node.js, and then you went on to go. We went and learned a little bit of Swift, and I was like, well, some of these basic, like you said, basic fundamentals are all there between the languages, right?
Mhm.
So that's yeah, one thing. They're all very similar in their own way, but they have their differences. It's just the fundamentals are somewhat similar.
And Anushka, what were your experiences like switching between programming languages?
Yeah, after knowing at least one, it was definitely easier to pick up on the other ones.
Yeah, I can definitely tell, and again, it boils down to the fact that programming languages are really just telling computers what to do. Each one can have slightly different syntax or vocabulary or structure or things like this or features. But at the end of the day, you're still telling a computer what it is that you want to accomplish. Um, I also do want to talk a little bit about the sorts of technology that you've built before, right? So, I mean, I've been working with I've been lucky enough to be able to work with a lot of different technologies. I've been I did sort of like classic app development and sort of programming since I was since I was 9. I've had for example, my first iOS app was accepted to the store when I was 9, and I started working with machine learning technology through IBM Watson actually when I was around 11 years old. So I've been able to work with a couple of different sets of technologies like that, and I've been able to build a couple of different applications that use those technologies, right? Like for example, my first AI powered application was called Ask Tanmay, and it was it's a system called an NLQA system, so it can answer natural language questions that you ask it, kind of like the original Watson that played Jeopardy. And so, there's been a variety of different applications that I built from there, some in, fields like healthcare or security or education, some of which I'm very passionate about. So what are some fields or industries that you're really passionate about building applications for, and what are some things that you've built in them? Anushka, maybe we can start with you this time.
Yeah, definitely. So when I was 10 years old, my mom took me to IBM where she works, and I was able to meet Pepper, the robot, and I was like really, really impressed by her. She was really awesome to talk to and everything. And I kind of, that's when my mom started pushing me into technology because she had introduced me to it. And I got interested just last year. And I've been working on a couple applications, some ideas that I had. One is for my county legislator app to explain, like, to bring news out to the county and know what's really going on. And one for a student with a bus driver, so like it prevents like missing the bus or if someone else needs a ride, that's kind of going off that basis. And I'm using IBM Watson as a chatbot. I've done one of the courses there, and I think that's really, really important for a lot of people to know. Chatbots are one of the most important and easiest things to learn in technology, in apps.
Yeah, chatbots are one of those technologies that I think are really, really powerful, and they're actually so powerful that lots of people overestimate just how difficult they would be to build, right? Like you can literally right now go to IBM Cloud, sign up for a free trial, or I mean, really any cloud, and sign up for a free trial. Go to the Watson Assistant tile and just spin it up, and just like that, even without writing any code, you can create a chatbot. You can take the little HTML embed link that Watson gives you and literally put that in your website, right? And then of course you can really augment, amplify the experience when you start to write your own code to sort of stitch together that conversation into a more complex workflow. It's something that I've noticed is over the years, it's actually gotten a lot simpler. I remember back when I believe this was 2016 or 17 when they initially had the Watson Dialogue service. That was a really interesting time because back then they had no concept of like intents or entities. It was just you give Watson Dialogue a sentence and it'll identify little keywords to try and know what you're talking about, and that wasn't intuitive at all. Like I would rather be using the little phone menus that you get where you like click one to go here, right? Those were more intuitive. But then people eventually started being like, oh, what if we combine the natural language classifier with dialogue? And then what IBM was like, oh, well, we can just merge them into a single service called Watson Conversation, which is now Watson Assistant. So it's been through a lot of evolution. It's been getting easier to build. Now we are getting actually quite a few questions from the live chat. Um, So I will be getting to those in just a moment. But first of all, before we continue, Gianluca, I also want to know what are some sort of things that you've built with the world of tech?
Yeah, so like I said before, web applications is one thing that I'm working on currently. So I'm pretty keen on building new web applications. I built like e-commerce stores from scratch with stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Some I'm working on an internal team right now, so we're building web applications for new and upcoming projects within the lab and stuff like that. And then last summer, I was working on building applications for robots for Pepper now. So one of the goals that we had as a team was to make it so that when someone comes into the lab, that the robot would introduce itself. You could sign in from there, and then you would go and get your badge. And it was pretty cool little process that was going on, right? And so I got to build those cool technologies like that.
Yeah, I've seen, and just for the people that aren't, I mean, of course, aware, the lab that you're referring to, Gianluca, the IBM Canada lab here in just outside of Toronto. So I remember actually I was seeing you working with some of that tech where the idea was to have Pepper, the same robot that you actually saw, Anushka, at one of the one of the IBM offices that your mom took you to. So the idea was to actually have Pepper sort of greet and sign visitors in. So that was a really interesting application. It's nice to see that at such a young age, not only do you have experience working with technology, you have experience working with technologies like Pepper. I think that's something that's really unique and really helpful. And I actually now that we're on the topic of robotics, I want to talk a little bit more about that. First of all, Anushka, just so I know, have you what sorts of robotics applications have you built? I know that you do. As you mentioned, you're on that robotics team. What kind of robotics applications have you built?
So basically, what my team does is we do FTC, which is First Tech Challenge. It's part of the FIRST organization for robotics. So what we do is basically each year there is a game, a challenge that is given to us, and we have to build a robot that will do that challenge and work with other robots to get a certain amount of points in order to win. So last year, the game was called Skystone, and the robot basically what it had to do was bring blocks over from one side of the field to the other side and stack them as high as they could go. And basically what we did, programmer and autonomous. So basically what the robot had to do was bring over, there's like a little box where all the blocks are on. You have to pull that to one side. We have to detect a bunch of stuff. And that's kind of based on what the game was. So each year it's different.
Very nice. Actually, that application interests me. Did you have to use like computer vision technology for that? What kind of stuff did you do for that?
I wasn't super immersed into the programming side of this, but I know that we used TensorFlow. We used a lot of, I think, JavaScript.
Interesting. TF.js, that's nice to hear. Now, the reason that I asked you what robotics technology you worked on is because I will say that, I feel like for a lot of people, robots are like this sort of they're almost magical, right? There's all sorts of incarnations of it, but when you go to like the average person that's never worked with technology before, and you say, what's a robot? They would picture like a humanoid robot, kind of like Sophia the robot, maybe something like Pepper if they haven't seen that sort of thing, and they would predict like really intelligent machines that are powered by AI and these sorts of things. But I personally feel like that depiction of robots and similar tech isn't particularly accurate. They seem like they're a lot more magical than they really are. And that's not to say they aren't useful. They are incredibly useful, right? They power so many things. But at the same time, I don't think that we give them credit for the things we should be giving them credit for, right? So like, for example, Pepper, right? We'll have people, and Gianluca, this is something that you and I have both actually experienced, and Anushka, I'm sure that you might have similar experiences, where people that have never used Pepper before or seen the, or worked with the technology behind it before, just even in the Up in Canada lab will be like, oh wow, that's so that's so natural. They'll be surprised as to how human-like it is. They'll try to interact with it as if it's a human, but then I feel like when you actually work on the back end and you realize what technology is going behind it and the fact that it's actually a lot simpler than most people would think, you start to realize that it's sort of just the depiction of the hardware in that robot that gives people the impression of this almost looks intelligent in a way. Do you sort of agree with that conception? Do you agree that robotics technology is incredible, but at the same time that we don't understand or we don't perceive it the right way, at least the average non-technical person? Maybe Anushka, we can start with you.
Yeah, so a lot of people can depict robotics in a totally different kind of ways, and that way that they depict it can definitely change the way, change the path that they're going to go on. Like if they think of robotics as like something they're never going to be able to do, it's like super high tech, I don't want to go into that field. They could be the smartest, they could be the genius that invents like, he could be the next Elon Musk or whatever. But he just saw robotics differently, so he didn't go into it, he or she. Um, and yeah, so the way that you definitely depict technology, robotics, it changes the way that you're gonna go.
I also sort of mean more generally as a society, right? Like the way that we view technology doesn't just affect at the individual level, like what people decide to do, but I feel like it also really changes the trajectory of the field itself because, the people that understand technology are, unfortunately, not the majority of people, right? They're the minority of people actually building the technology, which is one of the reasons that I think it's really important for everybody to learn how to code. But one of the sort of outcomes is that it's not the minority of people that end up making really important decisions like regulatory decisions, right? The people in government are the ones that do that. And so, do you think even just more societally that people don't really understand robotics technology fundamentally? That they sort of just go along with the hype or the news or movies, books, these things, and they sort of base a lot of their like important decisions off of that instead of what actually is happening like with the technology. And do you think that has like a negative effect or no? We could either one of you if you want to cover.
Yeah, I'll go. So yeah, I think the average person or average non-technical person, like you said, doesn't exactly, you know, they don't see robotics as being this almost non-complicated concept of coding from behind the scenes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I have this funny story. I was in school and we were watching a movie, maybe just under a year ago, and we saw this robot. It was about a robot taking over the world, right? And so one of my friends who knows that I was working on robots in the summer kind of knocked me and was like, "Is this what your robot's gonna do?" And I kind of just laughed it off, right? But then I said, and then he was like, "No, I'm serious." And I'm like, "Oh, you got to be kidding me." So then I explained the concept to him, the stuff that's going in behind the scenes and stuff like that. And he kind of, clued into that. It's not that over, it's not a huge concept to understand or a very hard concept to understand. Just got to start working on it, and then you get more experience with it, and it's not that bad overall. It's just the overall image that people have at the beginning isn't so great, per
Yeah,
se.
that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like a good example maybe would be like let's just say we take Siri, right? So if I were to literally take out my phone right now, and this is literally what I do every night, I would go something like, "Hey Siri, set for 8 p.m." Right? And then it sets an alarm. Now, the reason this is a really interesting example to me is when I said "Hey Siri," there was an individual set of code, and that's incredibly complex, that Apple engineers sat down and wrote just to detect "Hey Siri." Then after the "Hey Siri" detection, another set of complex code, or okay, there we go. Hopefully you can still hear me, but Siri on my Mac also just got triggered, and hopefully I didn't trigger more people's Siris on the stream. But all right, as I was saying, right. So right after it detected that wake word, which I'm not going to say, otherwise it's going to go again. But right after it detected that wake word, Siri was then able to go ahead and detect exactly what it was that I was saying. Right? It was able to convert my speech into words. Then a separate, isolated system was responsible for taking those words and understanding the meaning. Then, a manually built system that uses no AI whatsoever was responsible for going into the alarm API and actually setting the alarm and showing me on the display when the alarm has been set for. Then, finally, another building block was responsible for taking the pre-programmed response from Apple engineers and speaking that out in a really sort of natural way. That's the speech synthesis portion, right? So a lot of people, when they look at a system that's so well integrated and so seemingly intelligent like that, right? Because up until a couple of years ago, you couldn't just talk to your phone like that. Our minds associate that level of simple language understanding with something that only humans can do. But it's not, right? This kind of simplistic language understanding is something that even a phone can do. But because our minds associate it with that, we're like, oh, that's intelligent. We don't realize that it's just a bunch of little mathematical systems working together in harmony in a way that these engineers have put together such that it looks like a single intelligent package, right? And I feel like when you work with technology, you get more of a perspective as to exactly what that technology is like, and you can make better decisions not just individually, but even at a societal level. So that actually brings me to the fact that all of this was just a more complex way to say that I believe everybody should learn technology, because that makes it so that as a species we can make better decisions as to what we want to do in the future, because technology is driving and powering all of the things that we do. So first of all, do the two of you agree that everybody doesn't need to be coding all day, but at least should learn some level of technology to be able to continue to be relevant in future industries? And if so, how do you recommend they go about doing so? So maybe we can start with you, Anoushka.
Yeah, I definitely agree that people really need to be at least a little bit immersed in technology, because technology is going to be very, very, very important in the future. And to start off, I guess like learn some simple kind of code, get interested, figure out what you're interested in, what's your favorite thing about technology, whether it be like hardcore coding, doing websites, or basically chatbot applications. Just really follow whatever path like you want to go on.
Mm-hmm. Right, I completely agree, because I've always said that you should be doing what it is that you're passionate about in technology. And Gianluca, what do you think? What are some of the best ways that people can go about learning technology? And actually, not even just what are the best ways, but what are the ways that you've what are the ways that you've actually learned how to code?
Yeah, so I think everyone, like you guys said, should be immersed in technology, even the littlest bit, because it's going to be relevant in any future job. All jobs involve tech. Almost all jobs nowadays involve some sort of technology, right? So I feel like if you get a head start from when you're younger, or even our age or a little bit older, it always helps, because you can use those skills that you develop now for when you're older. So one way that I went about it was, I guess, before IBM, I got into a little bit of code, and I was interested in robots and stuff like that. But really, I had the experience of something simple where I would go on YouTube and search it up, and then I would have the YouTube video in front of me, and I would be kind of almost copying the code, but then changing it myself, right? So that's how I kind of learned to code in a sense. It helped out, and I think that everyone should find what they're passionate about, especially in technology, and just do some research on it, find how you're going to go about it. And for me, it was about going on YouTube and finding out how to do something. If I can't figure out how to display something on my front end screen, then I'll go and Google it, and then I'll come back, and well, it's there, right? So I think everyone should try and figure out the best way to go about it for them. But all the information you need is online nowadays. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really insightful, because you're right. Nowadays, there's no sort of excuse as to why you can't learn it, right? If you want, right now you could pull up cognitiveclass.ai and you could start learning machine learning technology, or even just programming, whatever, pretty much instantly, right? So, Anoushka, is that also reminiscent of the way that you learned technology? How did you go about that?
Yeah, everything, all the resources were online. Everything that you need is online now. So I did learn using just technology that you find online.
Mm-hmm. Very, very nice. And even the resources to learn about technology are powered by technology. How wonderful. So now, I also sort of wanted to ask you that we've talked about how people can actually learn about technology, and that's definitely really important. And we've also talked a little bit about the sort of technology that you've built, and I will say that I've personally had a few sort of like key favorite applications that I've seen that have sort of almost driven what it is that I'm passionate about, right? Like, for example, I'm passionate about technology and I always have been, but there have been a few key applications or or sort of use cases for technology that I've seen that have really just sort of blown my mind and been like, wow, we can do that. The one that got me into machine learning and sort of drove my passion to machine learning was IBM Watson. And then the one that sort of continued to propel that further into natural language processing was Project Debater from IBM. And in a completely different field, sort of just to say that you can have lots of different passions. One thing that really drove me into more low level, like hardware and compiler technology, was LLVM. Right, the fact that we can take so many different languages and compile them to a single compiler is just amazing to me. And also optimize the code so well. But so those are some of the projects that personally for me got me really interested, not only just in technology, but even more specifically in areas of technology. And I was like, wow, we can do that. That's impactful, right? What were some of those applications for you? What were some of your like sort of key favorite applications that you think sort of drove your passion towards what it is that you do today? Gianluca, maybe we can start with you this time.
Yeah, so I think, that the IBM Watson was something super cool. And I was always, once that came out, I was super interested in it. Now I didn't go into, that type of work like you did, but I do enjoy like the whole web applications. So when I see stuff online or I go on a simple website, I was always like kind of curious to how this is done. And so then, such a Shopify where you can go and almost drag and drop and you can have your own code in there, that was kind of cool to me. So I was like, well, how do I build something like this? And so now I'm kind of getting into that. How can I build my own application where, almost customers could go in and build something themselves, but also integrate their own code. And I'm kind of just using that drive in a sense, not to be public to anyone, but just to build it for myself so that I can understand deeper what goes into web applications and applications in general. So I guess seeing stuff online, seeing websites online, stuff like that, that really kind of drove me to see how does this work and how can I work in this field such like that.
Yeah, so that sort of innate curiosity, right? You look at a website, you look at a different application, you're like, how does that work exactly? Right? What goes behind that? That's really nice. Anoushka, what about you? What were some of the sort of key things that you looked at and you were like, yeah, I want to do that. Like I want to be able to build that. I want to know how that works.
Yeah, definitely. So after seeing things in action, like in robotics, like seeing the robot in action, I wanted to know how it really works. And looking at applications and looking at websites, I wanted to know how exactly they work. How did it look so beautiful? And like later on, I learned in the internship, CSS is what makes it beautiful. JavaScript brings it to life, and HTML is the base code. So definitely after seeing something, seeing the how good it can be, you want to learn how you can make it even better.
That's really nice to hear, right? It's sort of taking inspiration from those little basic things and being able to sort of expand that into so much more. And I mean, I know that the two of you have sort of had a really interesting way of learning about technology. I mean, Gianluca, you've been sort of like teaching yourself almost through all these different resources, like online and different books. And Anoushka, when you joined that club and when you started to see different applications of technology and how they're built, you were sort of fascinated by it. I mean, I've learned a lot of technology, sort of, on my own as well, using a couple of different resources, the internet definitely being one of them, as well as, the different books, right? And so, books were actually so helpful to me as I was learning technology and still are today that I decided to write my own as well, as you can see over here. So those were really important to me. And so I sort of wanted to know a little bit more about what sort of role did the education system, like actual school, play in, what role did they play in actually having you learn about the world of technology? Did they play much of a role? Was it helpful? How do you, we'll get into how you think it needs to evolve. For now, what was that role? Because I mean, a lot of the technology that I learned, back when I was in regular school, technology wasn't that big of a focus. Now I'm homeschooled, so a lot of the technology I've learned is on my own. Now, luckily, it is becoming a bit more of a focus. But what role did school play in your sort of learning of technology journey?
So yeah, I'd say that in elementary school there was little to none. Obviously, like we were small, we wouldn't be as passionate about it. in middle school, there were some clubs that you could join, but really in high school, it's where there were classes teaching specifically technology. There's intro to programming, there's system robotics. I'm taking system robotics this year. So once kids get older, there are definitely more opportunities to learn about what they want to learn about because you really know what you want to do, and that's what they're going to make classes on.
Hmm. That's really interesting. But actually, before we get to you, Gianluca, before I ask you the same question, Anoushka, you mentioned that back in elementary school. I mean, of course, you're not going to be introduced to Python and C++ in elementary school. That's not what I'm saying. But the question that I have for you is, don't you think it would make some sense to introduce kids to something like Scratch maybe in elementary school, just so that they can start to sort of build that logical thinking foundation? Do you think that makes sense?
Yeah, definitely. So I actually want to talk a little bit about my robotics team, what we did over the summer.
Sure.
We actually did start teaching Scratch to kids in elementary school, middle school, and I taught some classes with a friend, Scratch Junior, to like little preschool kids. So yeah, so that's one way that we definitely wanted to help out. We wanted kids to be more aware of technology and delve more into it.
Hmm. That's very nice because when you learn Scratch, to an adult it's like, oh, that's not real coding, right? And of course it isn't. That's not the point, right? If we're teaching preschool kids to code, we got to start with computational thinking, start with logical thinking, not with how do you write code, right? Like Gianluca, when I was introducing you to Swift, I actually pretty much remember the exact conversation. It was, you were great at the logical thinking sort of part because you've already coded in things like Java and JavaScript. And well, the only thing that you sort of needed a little bit of time to get used to was the syntax, right? The syntax of Swift. So why have that extra overhead for kids in like elementary school when we can start off with something like Scratch, is what I think, and build that logical thinking foundation so they can focus on learning syntax later, because that's secondary, right? But yeah, now, Gianluca, I also want to hear your thoughts. Sort of, what role did school or the educational system sort of play in you learning about the world of technology?
Yeah, so I knew a lot from my dad before because he's in this field, right?
Yeah.
So when I got into high school, grade 10 was kind of the first point where I realized that coding would be kind of cool. It was like I went into this Turing class and I got to learn the fundamentals. But one thing I do wish is that I learned it a little bit earlier, even if it was grade 7 or 8. And that touches along the point where we could have used something like Scratch, like drag and drop builder, stuff like that, to understand the fundamentals and the basics that go behind coding, right? And that's the thing that I think I was missing a little bit in that class. And so it did play a little bit of a role, education standpoint, to learn how to code. But for me, it was mostly, like I said, going online and figuring it out. Once I got interested in it, then I went online and figured it out for myself. I think, like in my school specifically, we don't have enough technology courses going on. And we have that one where, you learn this one Java, you learn just Java and the basics of that, but nothing more than that. And that's where I think a lot of schools lack.
Do you feel? I mean, I personally have done a couple of workshops at a couple of schools where they're actually like, and these are high schools where they're like computer science teachers that don't really know computer science, that are like sort of just teaching it for because they were told to teach computer science. And I feel like that kind of hinders from allowing the kids to learn what they're passionate about, because they're like, oh, the teacher can't figure it out, we definitely can't, right? That, and they wouldn't even necessarily think that explicitly, but that's just sort of implicitly what ends up, the bias that we end up driving into their mind. So the question that I have for you is, the different resources that you had at school to learn about technology, were they proficient with technology or not so much?
I think that the class that I took specifically was a computer science class,
Mhm.
and my teacher, although knowledgeable about what we were learning, wasn't so knowledgeable about what other like programming in
Mhm.
that sense, right? Any other programming languages. Like I went up to him and asked him once about JS. Not that I expected him, or not that I wanted. I just kind of asked him if he had an opinion. He said, to be honest, I don't know anything other than Java.
Mhm.
And I thought, computer science teacher, you would learn a little bit more. You want to learn a little bit more. But I think a lot of schools, they lack that, that drive or that passion, especially with computer science teachers. They kind of just get put into it, and then they got to learn it as they go, or stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I feel like that's something that we do need to work towards, right? There's still a lot of scope for improving the education system to really deal with technology in specific, because technology is something that I don't think you can teach the same way you teach everything else, right? Technology is the kind of thing. I mean, I feel like it's also kind of like art. Like you can't just teach someone how to be creative, right? I don't think it really works that way. You can't just teach someone how to write music. Of course, you can work towards, showing them examples and giving them feedback and working through that sort of implicit way, but you can't explicitly say, all right, if you've written these lines, this is the next line, right? There's no explicit rule like there is in math. Even in math, there's some creativity involved, but that's a different topic. So coding is something that you can't teach the same way that a lot of other things are taught, which is why I think it requires a bit of a more fundamental change to the educational system. And in my perspective, that change is more of learning by example, right? Because people wrongly think that in code you can just say, all right, if we're building this game, then you're going to put this function here that's going to call these other functions, and that's what the game is going to be. Or when we're building this robot, we're going to be putting exactly these libraries together in this way, as if that's the only way you can do it. But no, there are thousands of different ways. Anything can be done, and allowing students to explore through those possibilities is where the learning comes from. Which is why I think, learning by yourself and learning through, example and actually building things yourself is the best way to learn. So from both of your perspectives, what are the steps that the education system would need to take, or that you've sort of seen from your personal experience, in order to become more effective for technology? Anoushka, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, so I completely agree. Like, teachers definitely need to be passionate in order to be teaching about what they love, for kids to understand, to learn. So I want to say for system robotics, my robotics coach is actually the teacher there. And for most of the tech classes, it's mainly people that are immersed in technology, in tech clubs, in robotics clubs. There's other teachers that teach a language and they've started their own club for their language. So a lot of the teachers are very passionate about what they're teaching. They're very enthusiastic in the class. And I think that the more that teacher has a good relationship with the students and the teacher knows what they're teaching about and are very passionate about it, that's really going to amplify how much they love it, and the students are going to think like, oh my god, the teacher loved this so much, I love it too.
Yeah, that sort of passion is almost contagious, right? If the teacher's passionate about it, they're excited to be able to teach you about what it is that they're teaching all day. Like when I was in Winnipeg at that high school, right? The computer science teachers there, they were passionate about what they were talking about, right? You could tell that they loved it. And I mean, of course, while I was there, I loved technology anyway, and so that sort of passion was almost contagious to the students, and they were like, hey, if they're excited about it, we could be too. Right, and so that sort of really helps. You're right, Gianluca. What about you? How do you think the education system needs to change to sort of more match what you expect for people to be able to learn, how to code or how to work with technology?
Yeah, so like you guys said, the teachers need to be passionate about what they do and not just put into it. And I know a lot of teachers are passionate about what they do. I think computer science, in my experience, that a lot of the time they lack that passion or that drive to teach. And not to say that they weren't good at it, but the more passionate you are, typically the better vibe you give off to your students. Like they'll pick up on the tasks more. If you give examples to them of how to do it, they go and learn it themselves, then they can Google stuff, then they can have questions, and they're learning different ways to do it as well, right? So teachers need to have that passion as well, and the students need to have that passion, not just taking the course. But in terms of education system, I think what needs to change is that as simple things like letting us use computers to take notes in class so that you can get familiar with how a computer works and stuff like that. Like such simple things should be allowed. I know I had one class last year, I think it was an entrepreneurship class, I could be wrong, but where we weren't allowed to use our computers, it was paper and pencil. Yeah. And so I think something as simple as Google Docs would have been helpful. You have access to that everywhere, from your phone, your laptop, at home, at school, wherever you are, right? And I think a lot of the times the education system doesn't have the mandates in place so that teachers have, these tools and the preparation so that they can give this to their students.
I think both of you really have a very unique perspective that I very, very much like, right? And that is two things really stood out to me there, right? And that is that, first of all, teachers need to be passionate about what it is that they're teaching, otherwise students are never going to be passionate about it, and that passion comes along with an extensive knowledge in what it is that you're teaching about, right? I was only really, really passionate about, I mean, or actually, I would say that I've always been passionate about technology, but my passion grows whenever I learn something new, right? Like last year when I started working on, a really intense compiler project at IBM, my passion for technology grew tenfold because I was like, wow, we can do so much more with this that I never knew we could do. So that's one thing, but also at the same time, so many of us focus on, we need to teach kids how to code. We need to teach kids how to use technology and things like this. But I feel like at a more fundamental level, Gianluca, you're absolutely right. We don't just need to teach them how to code as just, 45 minutes a day you go to coding class, that's it. But rather integrate technology into everything else that we do, right? I was once, I believe I was on forgot what subreddit it was on. There was a Reddit post, something along the lines of how, iPads and like Chromebooks and these sorts of things are giving kids a skewed perception of what technology is like. And one of the comments on the post was, yes, you're right. My kids have been using iPads since they were really, really little, and now they've had to start using PCs. And gaming actually helped them a lot to learn how to use PCs because now they, go on their PC, they learn how to download and install games. They learn how to use Discord. They learn how to talk to their friends on a PC. They learn what applications are, what files are through the file manager. These sort of really, really basic, simple concepts that everybody should learn, and sort of needs to know about to be fundamentally productive in any society, even today, right? And it kind of surprised me because I've done workshops for high school students where they can't tell me how to download a file from Google Chrome and move it from their downloads folder to the desktop, right? They don't know those very basic concepts. So I think you're absolutely right in the sense that it's not just, we need to teach them how to code, but rather more of, we need to give them access to technology, allow them to use it so that at school where they're learning about all these different things, they're able to learn about technology as well, right? So it's more fundamental than just, learn how to code, right? That's a very unique perspective. Now, there's so much stuff that we could talk about right now. But right now I actually want to transition over to a couple of questions from the audience because there are quite a few really interesting queries coming in. I want to start off by asking a question from ALRC. ALRC is asking on YouTube, what should the first and most basic class or course be for a high school student that you would suggest for someone that wants to get into technology? So either one of you can take up that question. Anoushka, maybe we can start with you.
The basic courses at my school, I'm not sure if it's different at your school, but anything that starts with intro or introduction to programming, to coding, take that kind of class. Because it says introduction in the name. That's where you should start off, or go more in depth onto what you really want to learn and see if there's any courses there. Such as like if you're interested in robotics, take system robotics.
Yeah, so specialize in the things that you're really passionate about and start with introductions. Are there any sort of online resources in specific that you would recommend for people that want to get into programming?
Yeah, so you can use Watson Assistant, IBM Cloud. Go search up some courses on there. There's some really good ones. There's a lot of really good ones.
Wonderful. And Gianluca, what do you think some good sort of initial classes or courses are that would be good for high school students to learn about tech?
Yeah, like Anoushka said, anything with intro in it is best. That's, for me, it was Turing in school. That was good. It kind of gave me those fundamental basics. And then again, like learning anything and you can learn anything online, really. So once you find what you're passionate about and what you enjoy, take those classes in school and then also take it home with you, right? Go and learn it on yourself. You'll learn so much online that you didn't even know you could.
All right, so there's another question from Tassin, actually, and we sort of already just covered this one, but still, if there's something that you want to add, let me know. He's asking, if you two got the chance to change the education system that we're following today, what would you change? So anything you want to add, Gianluca?
Yeah, I would just say stuff like the simple basic things as we should be using Google Docs and to take notes and using computers and doing assignments and such online and communicating with people also in person but in technology as well, like having these docs open and working through just learning how to use a computer. A lot of people don't know in school, and it's sometimes hard to see that because the way our future is going is almost all technology, and if you don't know the basics now, how can you use them in the future, right? So I think education system wise, we need to start using computers for as many things as we possibly can.
Wonderful. Thank you. And also, Anoushka, anything you want to add to your answer?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Gianluca said. I think that we should start teaching kids tech more early on, so it can like spark something.
Wonderful. So being able to learn more early on is definitely important. I feel like that's even just generally important with anything, right? I mean, being introduced to something at an early age, not necessarily learning it, but being introduced to something at an early age is important because, again, you have a more open mind, right? You can just find what it is that you're passionate about, and suddenly you can just learn it, right? You have the opportunity to do that. That I think is a lot harder when you start to get older. All right, let's see. We have another question from Tassin. Actually, this is not related to technology, but this is an interesting question. I think, Anoushka, you're gonna like this one. Would it be good advice for a student who loves to sing to stop schooling and just practice more and more on singing?
I mean, if you're really, really super passionate about singing, that's what you're going to do for the rest of your life. If you think it's more important than school, go for it. If you want to build yourself up, go for it. But definitely know that school is there. It's going to help you if you go to school, and you can work on the side. You can take more classes based on singing. You can take chorus, and a lot more classes specific for you. But know that school is there to help you. But if you really don't want to do that, yeah, drop.
All right. Well, if you're really passionate about it, Tassim, then yes, that's what you should do. If that's something that you know you want to do, and all I can say right now is stay tuned. There's more coming up on TechLifeSkills around that. All right. So there are a couple more questions. Let's see over here. All right. So another question that we are getting is from Akash. This is a little bit more open-ended. It's from YouTube, but I do want to get your thoughts on this. And that is, what are your views on coding startups doing sort of wrong or misleading marketing for coding, saying things like, if your child learns how to code, he can become the next Sundar Pichai or Bill Gates, etc. What do you think about that marketing? Really quickly, before I hand that question over to you, something that I will add here is I feel like within technology in general, there's a bit of an issue of lots of different companies marketing their technology the wrong way. I really appreciate the way that Apple advertises their AI technology because they don't call it AI, they call it machine learning. Right, like if you take a look at all of their even consumer-facing assets, all of it, from the developers to the consumers, they call it machine learning all the time. They never try to tell you that your phone is intelligent because it has Siri. Whereas then you have other companies on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, like ASUS, where they have router features like AI Connect and AI Firewall and things that don't use any semblance of AI technology, but they've got it in the name so it looks intelligent. So we've got two different ends of the spectrum, and then I feel like if you were to sort of take a step back away from AI and just generally to coding, you also have that sort of misleading marketing that Akash is mentioning about learn how to code because this. Personally, I think what is so misleading about that is that then people are going to try to learn how to code not because they're passionate about it, but because they want to become the next X or Y or Z, whatever. What do you think about that kind of marketing? How do you think we can work towards having a better conception of coding, and why do you think people should learn how to code? And sort of how can we fix that issue? Gianluca, maybe we can go with you first.
Yeah, so I think in a sense that you can always become the next, XYZ, like you said, Tanmay. You can always become that next big person, but I think that type of marketing, in a sense, is a little bit misleading, just because, not every, you can do whatever you put your mind to, whatever you want to achieve in the end. but starting you off with the basis that you are going to become that next big person is kind of misleading. I think you should take the small steps to learning how to do something before you get into that, and make sure you're interested in it and not just doing it because someone tells you, oh, you're going to be the next person if you do this. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that's my perspective on it.
Thank you. And Anoushka, you as well? Any thoughts on that? And
I'm
Anoushka,
sorry,
yeah.
you were cutting out. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, no worries. Sorry. I was just saying, so any thoughts on Akash's question around, what do you think about the misleading marketing in the world of coding, saying, oh, learn to code so that you can become the next X or Y, like Sundar Pichai or Bill Gates or Elon Musk or whatever?
Yeah, so in any kind of advertisement, it's gonna be misleading. Like we even see in food commercials, it's not telling the truth. Like ice cream is not really ice cream; it's actually mashed potatoes with food coloring. So everything that you're gonna see online, there's a little bit lie and truth mixed into it, and you should really focus on what you're passionate on. If you know that you want to do this, then do that, and don't be so based on. Look more at the bigger picture, not like always be focused on your goals, but look at the bigger picture. See what you want to learn because we have to learn to learn.
Yeah, I feel like that's a very important point. We were just mentioning that a couple of episodes ago. For example, we were talking with Bob Lord about this, an SVP at IBM. We were talking with your mom actually. She told on the episode about learning to learn is really important, and I also feel like as kids, it's really important to learn about technology because when we grow up and when we're sort of ready to go into real jobs, there are going to be entire industries in just a couple of years that don't even exist yet, and they're going to be powered fundamentally by technology, right? If today everything is powered by technology, in the future, even more things are going to be powered by technology. That's just what we can project. It's pretty obvious. And because, like, for example, our parents know more of like this sort of math and sort of science language and sort of like the more classic fields and subjects, people also sort of take advantage of that and sort of work towards advertising, coding in that vein, even though that's not necessarily completely accurate. So there are quite a few different sort of ways that people advertise the world of code and computing in ways that it shouldn't necessarily do it. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, right? All I can say is that I feel like when we stop treating coding and computing as like an exotic other thing, like there's regular school, you've got your language, you've got your art, you've got your math, you've got your science, and then you've also got code over here in the corner for people that are really interested in computers. When we start to just treat that as another thing, just nonchalantly, like, yeah, we're going to learn how to code today, just like everything else that we do in school, that's when I think we're really going to start to see progress towards normalizing it. What I kind of want, actually, is to make technology not special, right? Because the mere fact that it's special today is sort of what gives people that skewed perception. And I mean, like as you mentioned, Anoushka, right? There's misleading marketing everywhere, right? So one of my favorite examples actually that you mentioned was that in ice cream advertisements, because it takes them so long and it's so hot in the studios, they don't actually put ice cream there. They just put mashed potatoes with food coloring. Love that example, right? It's sort of the same thing, right? Like even if someone's trying to advertise a coding course, they're going to try and show it a different way so that people can relate to that. So I think when we start to stop treating technology like that exotic thing that we need to disguise as something else and just like, oh yeah, learn to code, that's when I think we can really sort of make a lot of progress. Another question that we're getting from the live stream, I unfortunately don't see where we got that question. Let me see. Oh, there it is. It's from Salavendra. He's asking, how do you guys manage time along with your studies? So how do you make the time to do things like building technology? Gianluca, let's start with you.
Yeah, so in school, you should, like for me, I always focus on making sure I fully understand concepts in school and I put my studies first. But oftentimes what I'll do is like on a weekend, or I'll take one day during the week and I'll just spend maybe 5-6 hours during after school time, and I'll just focus my time on coding or learning something new in that sense, or building different applications. That's during school. So you always gotta, for me, time management is I focus on my studies, and then the time afterwards I try my best to make as much time as possible for building applications and learning new things. And sometimes it sounds crazy, but I stay up really late and work on the code instead because, that's something that I'm just really passionate about, really interested in. So I'll stay up super late and I manage my time that way. Everybody's different, so you just got to find the right balance of what works for you.
Wonderful. And Anoushka, what about you? How do you manage your time doing all the things that you do? And you're not even just passionate about technology, right? There's art, there's singing, there's so much stuff. How do you manage your time?
So the first thing you got to do is prioritize. You're gonna want to put your studies first because that's what colleges are gonna look at first. That's what whenever you're going into a job, they're gonna see how you did in school, how you reflected on what people were teaching you, and how you listened, how you learned. And then after that, you're gonna think about time management and put your extracurriculars to the side and say, I'm gonna do this for some time. I'm gonna do this for some time, and also with studies, if you want to take a class or something about something that you're really passionate about, it just makes school more fun, and you're just really interested on all the topics that you're learning.
Mm, wonderful. So as long as you're passionate about it, you'll find the way to make time for what it is that you want to learn. Wonderful. Another question. We actually got this question from Sheetal on the live stream. She's asking, how do you keep up with technology given the speed at which it's evolving or coming at us? So let's start with you, Anoushka.
Oh, okay. So technology is always evolving. It's going super fast. So you kind of gotta make predictions on your own to see where do you think this is gonna go and see if you were right in that kind of sense. If you weren't, then just keep learning, keep going. Yeah.
Wonderful. And Gianluca, what about you? How do you keep up with tech? Right, there's so much stuff going on. Right, like I mean, even I know that I've sort of helped you out with a little bit of the code that you were writing for some of your web apps, and literally fundamental things have changed about even JavaScript since you've been learning to code, right? So like there are these two kind now. Before there were just callbacks to do asynchronous functions. Now there's actual async await functions, and that's been sort of something that you've been working towards evolving your code base for. So how do you keep up with all the changes in tech?
Yeah, so the way I do it is not necessarily, I don't really think about it, but as you work with tech, you learn new ways to do it, and there's always new ways that are introduced to how to do it. So the more you work with it, the more, you learn new things and new things come into play. So you have that old concept in mind, but you're also using these new concepts that you have to learn. Again, like I watch a lot of YouTube videos on how to do things, or I'll ask you, Tanmay, on, what are these new things, so stuff like that. It's just once you work with it, then you start learning new things as you go. That's my best answer I could give.
Wonderful. No, that actually makes a lot of sense, right? Because I feel like as you continue to work with technology, in order to stay relevant, you're always building new applications. And in order to build new applications, you fundamentally have to use new technology to power those applications. And I feel like the real innovation comes in when you're not just sort of following along with those new applications and building new apps, but when you actually, again, like what you mentioned, Anoushka, when you are able to say, hey, this technology is going to be huge in the future, let's start using it now so we have a technical lead that's going to lead to a bigger lead in the future. Good example, Netflix. Back when Netflix was still in the sort of DVD by mail business, that was when they thought, hey, what if we use the internet to stream content? And they were the first to have a working technical solution to solve the technical problems to actually get content streaming. And because they had that huge technical lead, they had so much more time to prepare their own original content. So that translated directly into a business lead, into a content lead that was a huge competitive advantage for them. Otherwise, there are other platforms with more features, generally, better technology, Apple TV Plus, Disney Plus, right? That just generally are objectively as a platform better, but because of the technological lead that translated to a time lead that translated to a content lead that Netflix has, there's so much that everybody else needs to cover that they can't really just make that up in a very short time. So being able to project into the future and work towards is where innovation happens, but keeping up with technology is just what you do when you're consistently building applications that use the latest and greatest in order to be relevant to people. Right? Like, imagine if iOS had never bought Siri and today there were no personal assistants on the iPhone. No one would be buying the iPhone, right? They would be buying, Android phones. So just being able to continuously adapt to the newest technology while also projecting out into the future, that that makes it really important. Um, Asha is asking. Asha's over here. Okay, so Asha's asking just specifically for you, Gianluca. What coding do you do at IBM?
Yeah, so right now I work in an internal team where we're basically building web applications for IBM labs. So the labs as these buildings where everyone works in um, around Canada. So we're building these web applications like sign up websites and stuff like that, and kind of just progressing as we go and basically building web applications and testing web applications within IBM. That's
Very nice. Okay, so another question. This one's actually for both of you, from Hrishka. They're asking, how do you not lose the big picture in the scheme of things, right? Redundant. And how do you keep the momentum going? And I'm just gonna sort of add my own little twist to this question for you. Um, and I guess maybe something to add there is, or maybe sort of just to expand is, how do you keep in mind, generally the sort of goal or the objective that you're working towards as to what problem it is that you want to solve with technology, rather than just getting stuck up in the technology? Because I feel like it's really really easy to just be like, yeah, I'm an engineer, I'm a programmer, I'm going to sit down and write technology all day, right? I'm going to write code all day. Whereas when you see real companies that have actually had an impact on people's lives, like for example Apple, right? You realize they have a fundamentally different approach, which is, what's a problem? We want to solve the problem. Okay, now how can we build a technology to get us there, right? So a very, very targeted approach to technology building, rather than just research everywhere and then somehow apply this to a consumer product, right? That's not necessarily the right way to go. IBM also does something similar, where they'll be like, all right, what's a grand challenge that our researchers can do over the next 6 years, right? And after Watson playing Jeopardy, they thought Project Debater. How can we get a computer to argue? So what do you think? How do you keep the big picture in mind? How do you work towards objectives and your goals with the world of tech, towards solving problems? Maybe we can
Um,
go ahead.
So what I have to say is, if you're working on a project or something, remember to not get carried away by the little things. Sometimes you take a step back, document what you've done so you can read upon it later and see if you were using your time wisely, and just reflect on what you've done, on what you're doing, where you're trying to go, and kind of have time management, know what you're going to do in this certain amount of time, know when you want to be done with this task.
Wonderful. That's definitely really insightful. That's something that I feel like a lot of programmers, have this sort of there's a stereotype where like programmers and engineers don't really have that much, of the ability to keep that big picture in mind. And that's something that's more on the business side. But I feel like when we actually collaborate and sort of give that ability to the engineers themselves, we can do a lot more and innovate a lot faster. Gianluca, what do you think about that? Sort of how do you keep the big picture in mind as you learn how to code, or as you
yeah.
code?
So the big picture, yeah. So any project that I work on specifically, I have that big picture. Like I think of it like a pyramid almost, right? You have that big picture, that big final goal at the very top of the pyramid, and then you set goals for yourself as you move upwards. So you set a goal as in, I want to get this part of the project done in 2 weeks. And so that's at the bottom of the period. Then after the pyramid, so after that, then you move up to the next level. And you always have to set goals, small goals for yourself, so that you don't lose track of the big picture and you don't get off track as well.
Hmm. So at the end of the day, this is more of a sort of team management sort of problem, and I feel like as an individual, it can be a little bit more difficult, right? Because as an individual, working on an application or a program yourself, you don't really have a manager telling you what to do, when to get things done, holding you accountable. As an individual, it can be a little bit more difficult to sort of keep that bigger picture in mind. But when you do, it can lead to some great things at that individual level. So. Another question, and I'm not sure what sort of thoughts you would have on this, but if you do, I'd love to hear them. Any thoughts on students pivoting very early to pre existing frameworks without completely learning the language itself? So, for example, learning how to use Watson Assistant without necessarily learning how to use the Python code that you're going to be integrating it with. or learning, Express.js to code web applications without learning Node.js fully, sort of to make that more relatable with your sort of stack, Gianluca. So any thoughts around that? Should people do it? Should they not? If so, how should they do it? What are your thoughts?
I mean, whenever you're doing anything, you could start off by learning like very little about it, but the more that you do it, the more you're gonna want to learn about it, the more that you're gonna need to learn about it in order to what it is what that you want to do. So eventually, you will end up learning everything that you need to.
Very nice. All right. And Gianluca?
Yeah, so I thought the first thing I thought about when I heard that was this one quote that I heard one time. I can't remember who it was from, but that always take on the challenge and take the opportunity when you have it and learn how to do it as you go. And that's what I've been kind of going about. I didn't fully understand Node.js or HTML, EJS, all that stuff when I first started, but as I practiced more and as I worked with it more, I started to understand it more. So I took on that opportunity, that challenge, and I'm learning as I go. So that's my advice.
Very nice. Learning as you go is definitely something that I think is really important. So this question was from Akash Gupta on YouTube, so thank you very much for asking that, Akash. And with that, there are a couple of more questions that we're getting through the live stream, but I will say that in case we missed any right now, go ahead and put those, or wait, this is a really interesting one. I'm going to pause because this question I think is really nice. This question is from Saroj on the YouTube live stream. He's asking, mostly the new generation looks at applications and quick implementations rather than learning actual core theoretical computer science things like mathematics. Do you think that that is going to be a gap in the future? And really quickly, one thing that I'm going to say, or rather, I'm going to let you answer that quickly before we go ahead, and then there's something that I want to say because this is a very interesting question that I want to also get your thoughts on one more thing on. So first of all, answer that question, and then we will continue. Either one of you can go first. Maybe Gianluca, you can go first this time.
I was actually going to say, Anushka, if you want to start with it.
Oh, sure, Anushka, start.
Oh my God. Can you rephrase the question a little bit? I kind of got it, but
Sure. So the idea is that like a lot of developers nowadays, like the sort of young developers, are focusing a lot on just implementing applications. Like, oh, I want to build a chatbot that does this, or I want to, create a little UI for an application for a hackathon that pretends like it does something, rather than learning the actual computer science concepts that actually go behind computing, like the actual computational thinking that goes behind programming. Do you think that's going to cause a knowledge gap in the future for these developers?
I feel like, yeah, a lot of younger kids are looking at the more glorified version of whatever their project is going towards. They're going to look at the big picture. They're going to see the very top goal. They're going to see that's where I want to go to, and I don't care what I have to do to get there, but I want to do it quick. I want it to be easy. And yeah, that could create some kind of knowledge gap. But also, I think that there's a lot of kids that want to learn every single thing about what they're doing, and they're going to know there's not going to be any knowledge gap for a lot of kids too, I think.
Wonderful. And Gianluca, any thoughts that you have around that as well?
Yeah, to touch on those points, I think getting to it the quickest way possible isn't the best option. I think you should have those fundamental basics and that understanding of how the program would work or along the lines of that. And I think taking the step back to learn those fundamentals is going to not have so much of a gap in the future if we work towards understanding the concepts and understanding the way that these programs work instead of rushing into them and seeing only the big picture.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I actually really like this question because recently OpenAI came out with their new neural network called GPT-3. And a lot of people were like, oh my God, we can tell GPT-3 to write code for us. And now we can say, oh, make a little website with the Google logo and a little search bar with two buttons, one clicking Google search and one says, I'm feeling lucky. And there we go. It developed the Google homepage. Isn't that great? We no longer need developers. But that's not how it works, right? We can't just say, all right, the computer can design HTML and Angular code for us. Goodbye, developers. That's not how it works, right? At the end of the day, there are developers whose only job is to take an exact, clear-cut description of what something needs to exactly function and behave like, and then just translate that to code. So at that point, the thinking, the creativity has already been done, and the only thing left is to literally write down the code to do so. And that's what GPT-3 is doing. That's not necessarily impressive, right? Pretty much anyone could just learn the syntax and then take an exact description of the exact architecture of an application, write down that architecture in syntax. That's not complicated. That's a translation task. The complicated part is saying, I want a search engine, and being able to come up with that design, being able to figure out how the pieces are going to interact, figuring out that I need an I'm feeling lucky button to automatically click the first result, right? Figuring out these things, and then putting together the UI, putting together the code is the simple part. Actually, just yesterday at night, I was watching a YouTube video. It's part of the the Bon Appetit YouTube channel, right? They've got this series, Gourmet Makes, right, where we have lots of different things that they make themselves, and this one was about the Cadbury cream eggs, right? And in the middle of the episode, I believe her name is Claire, actually puts together a little robot to automatically stir something on the stove for about an hour. And at the end, one of the things that she was saying was, I realized that it's really easy to make X. I forgot exactly what it was, but it doesn't really matter. And then another girl comes up and is like, didn't the robot do that for you? And then Claire's response was, well, I did the thinking, the robot just did the stirring, right? So I feel like that's exactly the mindset that we need to have here. The humans at the end of the day are still doing the thinking, right? So it's important for the humans to understand those core concepts, as Saroj is mentioning. But then we can have, either the computer or people actually do that translation for us, which is the simple part. So that's my thought on that. And I think the sort of thoughts that you shared really sort of connect at a fundamental level there. Finally, a question from Ashu for the two of you. This is a really quick question, and that is, how do you stay motivated by technology? What keeps you motivated about the world of tech? Maybe we can start with you, Gianluca.
Yeah, one thing that keeps me motivated is just always trying to learn new things. And when you're always building new applications and working with it, you have to try and set goals for yourself. And once you reach that goal, then it's almost satisfying in a way that you said, I'm going to get to this point. You got to that point. You did your best at it. And I think that's just how you keep motivation going. You do things, you learn new things, set that goal, surpass it. And it's satisfying in a sense. And it's like, oh, I want to do that again. Right.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And also, Anoushka, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so a way to keep yourself motivated, I guess, is when you're working on a project and you feel yourself like you're starting to get bored or something, just like remember, once you're done with this, you're going to impact so many people, and so many people are going to see the work that you've done. They're going to like it. They're going to love it. But just the fact that you're going to impact a bunch of people, that's what's keeping you motivated.
Right. Being able to think of the impact that your work is going to have on a sort of larger scale in society is definitely important. Wonderful. Thank you very much, the two of you, for sharing your thoughts. This has been an absolutely wonderful session. There are lots of different questions that weren't necessarily as related to today's lesson that we did not take. But if there are any questions that you do really want to get answered, do make sure to put them in the comments. There are a couple that I'm going to go ahead and answer in the comments regardless. And if there are any questions for Gianluca or Anoushka, again, put those in the comments. I'll go ahead and ask them and have them comment on the YouTube video as well. Apart from that, if there were any questions, again, on Facebook or LinkedIn as well, feel free to comment on the YouTube replay. You have a link to that on the other platforms, and then we will go ahead and get back to you as well. But then again, this was a wonderful discussion. Thank you very much. If I may, I will ask you one last question before we go, because I feel like, being so young and being, the future of the world of technology, quite literally, I feel like this is a question that I should ask you before we end today. And this question, again, is from Hrishka. They're asking, what is the next big thing in the industry, according to all three of you? So, including me, but I'm actually going to let either one of you two go first. Who wants to go first? Gianluca, maybe you?
I'd have to think about that.
Sure.
I think,
Anoushka, what do you think?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, honestly, I have to think about that too. That's a really, really big thing.
Maybe I can go ahead and I'll go ahead and give a few of my thoughts while you go ahead and think through that. But essentially, I believe that the future of technology is going to be a couple of simple things. First of all, we're going to start to see people adapting to technology a lot more, right? So fields like education that have traditionally been, really sort of, kept a really old mentality to the way things need to be done are going to be forced to adapt things like COVID are going to sort of force us to innovate even if we don't want to, and we're going to start to use technology in a lot more places than we even do today. We're also going to start to see technology become more normalized and people just realizing, oh yeah, it's just another thing, right? It's not special, it's not exotic, it's not a unicorn subject, it's just another thing. And specifically, I think AI technology is going to be growing a lot, and people will start to realize what it can and cannot do. People will start to realize that, hey, we're not creating super intelligent machines that are going to overthrow humanity. We're just building simple mathematical models with calculus that help us identify patterns in data, right? They're going to start to have that bit of a realization that they're like, oh, well, apparently we're not all going to die to robots now. So we're going to have a little bit of that sort of realization of, oh, that's what we're going to be doing with AI. So I feel like those are the three main things. But do either of the two of you have any thoughts on like what's the next big thing in tech?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. Like, technology is being so much more normalized after COVID-19. But seeing like COVID-19 right now, and also the fires going on in California, no one really knows what to expect. So I think that the best thing that we can do right now is just learn AI to its fullest, learn whatever you're passionate about to its fullest, because you have the time, and the more time that you have, the more in depth you can go into a project or something that you're really passionate about.
Wonderful. And Gianluca, any thoughts around the future of tech?
Yeah, I think that, COVID-19 is kind of making us innovate, like you guys said, even if we don't want to. And such as, like, for example, our school system. Who thought that we would be taking school online in a Zoom call? Like, that's almost unrealistic. Or if you were to say that 7 months ago, you'd be like, what? That would never happen. But here we are doing it, right?
Yeah.
I think next big technology, like you guys said, AI, cloud computing, all that stuff is kind of tying into the way that we're going in the future. And yeah, those are my thoughts.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing. And now, with that, officially, I must say that this was an amazing discussion. And just before we can leave today, one last thing that I want to ask you is, we've got a really diverse audience today. We've got, people from business, people who are developers, people who are students, right? All sorts of students, all the way from high school to university and college and these sorts of things. And so I want to ask you, before we leave today, is there a message that you want to leave the audience with? About what it is that we've talked about the world of tech, really anything. It's open-ended. What message do you want to leave the audience with today?
Maybe I'll start with this one.
Sure.
I was just gonna say that you need to find what you're passionate about. At the end of the day, you got to do what you love, and especially in technology, that's one thing that you need to find. You don't want to be working on something that you're not interested or passionate about. So the way technology is going, it's our future really. So find something that you're super passionate about and work towards it and set goals for yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Gianluca. And Anoushka, what would you like to leave our audience with today?
Yeah, so I want to say one important thing. Do not be afraid of failure. Whatever you start up, you're going to fail. Just don't be afraid of it. It's gonna happen eventually. But you just need to know how to learn from it, and it's gonna help you. You're gonna have your mistakes. You're gonna learn from your mistakes, and that's just what's gonna make your project so much better.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. This is really, really interesting. I love your unique perspectives, right? I feel like we talk so much with like adults on this show, and we talk with a couple of students before as well. But I feel like when we really get down to the fundamental, right, the people, two of you, for example, that are quite literally representing the future of what programmers are going to be, right? I feel like then we get really, really unique perspectives because you actually have experience being in the educational system, but also learning about technology and seeing what the contrasts are, right? Seeing where things need to improve, what's already being done really well. Gianluca, you mentioned, for example, something that I barely ever hear people talk about, which is, we have to fundamentally adapt to technology better so that kids can learn how to use that tech, right? It's not just about building it. It's about how do you use technology, allow us to use technology in the classroom to take notes and do simple things, right? Anoushka, your comment again was absolutely incredible. Being able to make sure that teachers are passionate about what they do and allowing that passion to be contagious to other students, right, is really, at the end of the day, how people can learn. And so with that, I would also like to say a huge thank you to everybody joining the stream today. Of course, these streams are held every Sunday in the morning Eastern Time at 11 a.m., so make sure you do join us next week. We've got some really exciting stuff coming up next week. I mean, I'm personally really excited for next week. We're actually going to be almost taking a look at the other end of the spectrum. So this time we took a look at high school students, and next week we're going to be taking a look at the opposite end of the age spectrum and seeing some experience from someone who's been in the industry for many decades at a company that everybody has heard of. So I can't tell you much more just yet, but do stay tuned for the 24th episode of Tech Life Skills with Tanmay. And with that, I will also like to say, again, thank you very much to Gianluca. Thank you, Anoushka, for joining me today. This discussion was really exciting for me. I learned a lot, got a new perspective on the world of education and technology and how they intersect. Huge thank you to everybody joining the stream, and goodbye, everybody.